Good afternoon and warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today. My name is PIYUSH TIWARI. I'm professor in property at Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of land I'm on today, the Wurundjeri people, as well as the traditional owners of land you are situated on, and acknowledge that Indigenous Australians have been custodians of the lands and waterways of Australia for thousands of years. I pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. As part of State of Industry webinar series, we'll discuss today Workplace of the Future post-COVID-19. We have a very strong panel today to discuss this important topic. Let me introduce them. Peter Holland, he is one of the Australia's foremost property economists. He is director of SCHWAB and is also global trustee and past president of Urban Land Institute. Welcome, Peter.
Good morning, PIYUSH.
We are joined by ELLIE SCHWAB. She is head of office portfolio at Dexus. She has a wealth of background in property development and has been involved in major urban renewal projects, including Victoria Harbour at Melbourne's Dockland. Welcome, ELLIE.
Hello, everyone.
Finally, we also have Sue Lim. She is principal workplace consulting with 6 Ideas. She has over 2.5 decades of experience in business and place strategy. Her recent projects include developing new workplace strategies for Amazon and Zurich. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you. Hi.
Last 12 weeks, we have seen our lives change dramatically. Our homes have also become our workplaces. Despite initial reluctance, we have all adapted to this situation remarkably well. Now that lockdown is being eased, and slowly we may have to go back to our workplaces, the question that is in our mind is, what does this workplace of the future look like post-COVID-19? Without further ado, let me go to Peter. Peter, many years that I have known you, this is probably the first time and that I've seen you in Melbourne or Australia for the last 12 weeks at a stretch. How has your global career adapted to this change?
Well, at the moment, it's challenging, to say the least, PIYUSH, but one has to adapt and run with it as conditions are. Without being able to travel, which I'm going to talk to a bit later, has really restricted what I can do. Having said that, I work remotely a lot in any event because I'm in different countries all the time, in hotel rooms, etc., etc. But the world has changed and you have to go with it. It brings opportunities, it brings challenges. There are some light at the end of the tunnel, so that's encouraging. But it's not as easy as where it was before post-COVID-19, that's for sure. And look, I think one of the things, current conditions as they are, is really, they're acting as a catalyst for change in many different things. So there's a lot of good things that are going to come out of this.
And what do you think is the biggest economic challenges that Australia faces today? Okay,
well, look, there's a number of challenges, a whole lot, to be honest, PIYUSH. I'm going to touch on 6, okay? Look, the first one is just persistently high unemployment and low household income growth. Job retention and job creation are going to be the major challenges post-COVID-19. Unemployment's expected to, come out to now around about 8% for year ending 2020. And the worst affected sectors will be hospitality, travel, entertainment, arts and retail. Currently, the JobKeeper program is to a certain extent masking the real issue and the impact of unemployment, but importantly, look, it really is keeping many people, unemployed people, alive. However, once this program finishes, we're going to have massive unemployment problems on our hands, and then job creation becomes the biggest challenge, right? And what industries are likely to offer the best growth prospects remains the next question. And look, clearly these industries will need strong government support and encouragement. Standout potential sectors for high growth employment, the obvious ones include tech and telecommunications, health, aged care and high value manufacturing. Unfortunately, most of the unemployed, however, will not be suitably qualified for these jobs, hence we're going to have a massive need for retraining. And look, history's shown that the longer people remain unemployed, the harder it is for them to get back into the workforce. So every effort has to be made to prevent long-term unemployment. So that's the first challenge. Second is low population growth. You've got to remember, net overseas migration has historically been one of the major drivers of our economic growth. And typically, we've been taking 200,000 to 300,000 a year, and that's 60% of Australia's overall population growth. So this has been a major contributor to Australia's housing construction, rents, and housing prices. As it stands today, net overseas migration for this year is now expected to be about 168,000, which is a 30% drop from the 240,000 last year. And more importantly, for next year, financial year 21, it's coming back to supposedly around 40,000, and that's an 85% drop. So this represents a decline in overseas net migration over 2 years of around 280,000 people. And look, when you think about the office sector, that does have consequences, because much of the net overseas migration has been skilled professional workers, and many of those work in office space and they live in Melbourne and Sydney. So challenge number 3, lower trade volumes, global trade. And this is a real hot topic at the moment, as we all know. Our dependency on trade with China has become just such a major issue. Is this just a temporary noise for negotiating purposes, or is it a real longer-term issue that requires Australia to look very seriously at lessening its dependency on China and therefore seeking out other trading partners? And look, only time will tell on this issue. Challenge number 4, and this one hits me, it relates to structural constraints on the free movement of people, business, pleasure, education, and immigration. So, we just restricted our movements, what we can do. So it's going to be challenging for the rest of this year, but it's going to have longer-term consequences and implications over the next few years for people. And people, look, they'll be reluctant to travel. And look, needless to say, the cost of travel will have to increase. And unfortunately, the decade of cheap overseas airfares, which, you and I and everyone else has benefited from, is over. And speaking personally, as I said before, like many others, I have been affected by travel imposed by COVID. In normal times, I spent half my time travelling and overseas and travelling once every 10 days. It's now 82 days, PIYUSH, since I last travelled. How long that's going to continue, I'm not sure. So my work's been affected, but having said that, there's one member of the Holland household who's benefited fantastically out of this, and yes, you guessed it, it's Penny the dog. But funny enough, even he's now complaining, and would you believe have been overwalked? So you can't win them all. The two other challenges I'll just briefly touch on are the shortage of equity capital to fund growth and development of key sectors, particularly high manufacturing. And we're talking about having stricter FIRB investment guidelines as currently proposed. This is not going to help, right? We need equity capital, big time. Final challenge is insufficient investment in large-scale infrastructure projects. And look, what happens typically in times of economic hardship is that the mega infrastructure projects, unfortunately, often, such as I think what will happen with high-speed rail between Melbourne and Sydney, get shelved. They're just put off for the future. It's all too hard and too expensive. So look, those are the main, as I would see it, 6 challenges. Plenty of others, but they're the main ones.
Thank you very much, Peter. Very comprehensive review of the economy. Now, we heard from Treasurer last week or the week before that the economy has contracted and we are in recession after many years, strong growth. How deep is the recession and what do you think the economic recovery would look like? Okay.
Well, look, interestingly, Australia has not experienced a technical recession. And for those who don't know what a technical recession is, it's 2 consecutive quarters of negative real GDP growth. We haven't experienced that over the past 30 years. We're now getting it, right? We've got it. Look, our economy, in perspective, has been remarkably resilient, and our worst economic slump to date was in the early 1990s, at which time we had 1 quarter of negative growth of 1.4%. And this period, as you may recall, you probably weren't in the country at that time, but for those who were, we can remember very high inflation, double digit, high interest rates getting up as high as 18%. Try that on your home mortgage. I had it. Boy, did it hurt. And unemployment ballooned out to around nearly 11% and didn't recover for 6 to 7 years. So it took 6 years to recover from that. But that was tough. The looming pandemic-induced recession we now are going to have is going to be painful. It's going to be deep. But as would be expected, there's a range of the severity of pain as expressed by the various forecasters, including the likes of OECD, IMF, Treasury and Deloitte's. And so there's no definitive forecast, never is, never will be. But on a positive note, I think the current sentiment appears to be considerably more optimistic than was 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago. We were talking about 7% negative decline in GDP and unemployment going up to 10%. And, so we are coming out of it better at the moment. So there is a degree of confidence. So if we look at, as yesterday, I got the OECD latest forecast which released, we're talking about a 5% decline for this year, calendar year 20. And that's still the nation's biggest hit is a negative growth in the economy since the Great Depression in the 30s. But having said that, it's still one of the best performances or expected performance of any of the rich nations throughout the pandemic. Globally, they expect the global economy to decline by 6%. USA at 7.3%, and then interestingly, UK at around 11% negative, and Italy similarly with those, and same with some of the other European countries. So relatively okay, right? Not so bad. Assuming no second wave of the virus affections occurs, then everyone talks about a U-shaped recovery. It's not a V-shaped; it's U-shaped. It's a swoosh, and GDP is expected to bounce back next year now at 4%, and then coming back to pre-COVID levels of 2 to 3% thereafter. But the economy won't be fully recovered until around 24, 25, by which unemployment should get back to that pre-COVID 5 to 5.5%. That's where it sits at the moment. But in the interim period, this is the next few years, we're going to have low interest rates. They'll remain. We'll have low household income and spending growth, so spending is an issue. And we'll also be putting more money, we'll be more cautious, putting more money into saving. And look, over this period, people and businesses are likely to be more cautious, more cost-conscious and more frugal. And the pandemic is similar to the Great Depression. And look, it's basically knocked the socks off most of us. And it's an experience that will remain with you for the rest of your life. You won't forget it, right? No one will. And look, the scenario I've just sort of outlined, please note, that's the single wave scenario. It could be worse, God forbid. The second wave would really paint a much bleaker picture and would create major debt servicing problems for many individuals and businesses. And this scenario would amplify a major fall in house prices, because I don't see a massive fall. I don't see anything like the 30% falls people are talking about. It's more like the 10 to 15%. But if the second wave happened, it would be major, and that would really derail the chances of recovery. So that's how I see it.
Thank you, Peter. Difficult times, but there are silver linings, as you say. Ellie, may I ask you, what impact do you see on office property market?
Well, that similarly is a very challenging question because we don't know how long COVID will last. Certainly for the office market, we've come into this situation in a really strong position. So record vacancy rates, certainly across Melbourne and Sydney, strong face rent growth over the last many years has put us in a really good position. Our outlook is that, look, it's going to be sluggish for quite some time. I think vacancy will increase to a certain extent, particularly across stock that's not of great quality. I think we will see a flight to quality, and therefore those landlords that have got great assets will benefit from that somewhat. We're going to see face rent staying pretty much the same. Incentives will increase, there's no doubt about it. The big unknown is what we call downtime, how long the let-up period is going to be for commercial office. And I suspect that the trend that we're going to see is that many tenants will now decide to stay put until they work out what the new normal is in terms of what their full requirement is going to be, and also their own economic circumstances and how well they're performing. We're going to see probably the companies that are going to do best will be around the IT, professional services, government. But the ones that will suffer the most will be travel companies, recruitment companies, and unfortunately education as well, as we see a reduction in overseas students coming to Australia. So look, I'm a little bit like Peter. People assume the worst probably a month ago. We're just getting a little bit more comfortable about our new normal, and we expect to recover, but slowly, the U-shaped recovery, as Peter was saying. But overlaid on top of that is the fact that Australia has coped really well with this pandemic. And in terms of investment, particularly overseas money and overseas superannuation funds, they will see Australia as a bit of a safe haven. And they've been impressed with the way Australia has dealt with this situation. So hopefully that will bear well for landlords certainly.
Thank you, Ellie. I think that ties in very well with the next question, which I have for Sue, is that how have employers and employees coped up with the crisis?
Yeah, remarkably well, I think. I mean, it's certainly been the fastest move en masse online in terms of remote working, and I think organisations have set up hardware and software pretty quickly. Some organisations that have already employed activity-based working models, I think, have found it a very easy sort of transition, mostly because their technology systems have already been in place, and also some of the behaviours around remote working have been established. So I think you've seen lots of larger occupiers with kind of mature workplace strategies adapting very quickly. On the employee side, we've run a survey. So far we've got about 6,500 data points. And about 3/4 of the respondents said it was an easy transition, which I think is a pretty high number. Only 10% suggesting that it was a difficult transition to work at home. And I think some of that is also related to the fact that schools were moved to homeschooling as well. So, you know, some difficulty adjusting to a different kind of home situation. Of course, you know, we've seen an incredible shift to video. I mean, you know, we've done conference calls a lot in the past, but I think no more, you know, we've never seen this sort of level of video calls and events before. So I think that's been really interesting. Some issues around internet and bandwidth connection, as well as some security pieces. But I think, you know, organisations who provide that sort of technology have really responded quickly.
Thank you, Sue. Can I also ask about, have they been largely reactive, or did they look at some definitive strategy to adapt to this new situation?
I think some organisations were very much ready for this, you know, not necessarily because they were expecting a pandemic, but because they have been, you know, really flexible in the way they've allowed their workforce to be remote, and they've always had tools available. But I think some who perhaps have been more traditional and office-based in the past have certainly had a different shift. And then, of course, you know, we're talking about knowledge workers here too. So there's plenty of workers out there who, you know, do rely on human contact, you know, healthcare workers, education. I think those sorts of professions have been, you know, found it a much harder sort of proposition.
Thank you very much. Ellie, there is one question which has come for you. What impact will working from home and social distancing have on demand for office spaces?
Well, it's a challenging question. We don't really know the answer at this point. I think people are, as I said before, are trying to find their new normal. I think we will see a shift towards more permanent desks. I think as people until the vaccine is in place, people will be much more focused on hygiene. And in order for employers to give confidence to their employees that it's okay for them to work from an office, people will be expecting, high levels of hygiene and ideally their own workstation so they can feel comfortable. That's without even considering the impact of public transport and what that means. But I think the trend that Sue's talking about will continue. I think those people who've been working remotely or the organisations that are already trialled working remotely will continue to do so. And the ones that are just getting used to it now are realising actually it's a really good solution to allow people to work flexibly. And therefore, I don't think we're going to see massive shifts in quantum of office space, or we're not going to see a remarkable reduction in office space at the moment, but we're going to see a change in behaviour initially. To the extent that that will translate into different habits in terms of what the office workspace will look like, too early to tell. If a vaccine happens sooner than we expect, then I think there will be a fairly rapid return to the old way of working. But I think now that we know that, pandemics are a reality in this global environment, people will be looking for particularly a greater focus on hygiene and a focus on giving employees the choice to work from the office or from their home, depending on where they feel safer or more comfortable to do so.
Right. So that would change the way offices operate in the current situation. So how would the return to office look like?
Is this for me?
Yes.
I think that the first hurdle that everyone's dealing with is how do people get to the office before we even can contemplate a return to the office. I think Melbourne's quite well placed. We're very flat, so a lot of people will cycle in or they'll find a way to walk in. We've got a lot of public car parking. It's still relatively cheap compared to Sydney, so we're going to see a lot of people finding different ways to come to the office as well as working from home. Once they get through the public transport, their journey to work, the next concern is the lifts and being able to access the workplace safely. We've been doing a lot of work with WorkSafe Australia about determining what spacing we have to allow for in lifts. Do we need to increase ventilation in lifts? Do we need to look at technology so that we can go touchless, avoiding people touching lift buttons, et cetera, et cetera? These innovations will all be happening in the next few months to allow people to feel comfortable about going into a lift. And then, of course, once you get into your actual work environment, cleaning cycles will be amplified. We will see a different way of how people will be using their kitchens and breakout spaces and meeting rooms. So there will be, as I said before, there will be a much greater emphasis on hygiene going forward.
And would some of these translate into long-term impacts?
I would expect so. Look, I think we will see, I agree with Peter, we will see quite a bit of innovation in the next 6 to 12 months, particularly around contactless technology. And it will continue.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Ellie, can I just break in there, PIYUSH? Just in terms of the cleanliness and costs associated with running your office buildings, clearly that's got to go up. Does it not, if you do all these things and they stay as a more of a long-term feature?
Yeah. No, I mean, cleaning is still a very small component of total outgoings, if you compare it to land tax and some of the statutory fixed costs. We've taken the choice that we're giving our tenants the choice on the amount of cleaning that they want to carry out. So we will be offering different scales of cleaning depending on whether people want amplified cleaning or less cleaning. I mean, to the extent that people are returning back to work very slowly and will continue to work predominantly from home, we're giving people the option to actually reduce their cleaning cycles. So, yes, costs will increase, but I suspect it'll be about a 6-month window before we normalise what that looks like.
Thank you very much. I think there is another interesting related question which has come up. Maybe I'll pass that on to you, Sue. Are you also looking at legal ramification of work from home, like liabilities, insurance cost, privacy, surveillance, sign agreement, OHS, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an issue and a risk for organisations. And I think people do need to kind of think about what they're going to do for their employees in terms of providing them choice. So, work from home has typically been widely offered, but in an informal sort of basis. I think what we've seen from this particular experiment, if you like, is organisations providing equipment into people's homes. So whether it's ergonomic chairs or monitors and, different kinds of technology to help them adapt. And I think perhaps, organisations will need to really look at what they will provide, whether they have formal policies, ergonomic assessments, etc. One of the things that came out in the survey is that most people have kind of identified that it's their own, individual responsibility, I suppose, which is kind of interesting in itself. I mean, about 10 years ago, when work from home and teleworking started to come into, multinational industries in the first instance, there were a lot of organisations who were setting people up at home in an ergonomic way, providing funds for equipment, etc. But equally others who said, the risk from an OH&S perspective and a litigious perspective was too great that we wouldn't do it. So I think, there's two sides of every argument, and it'll come down to, what organisations want to do in terms of providing for the desires of their employees.
Right. Thank you very much, Sue. Peter, can I ask you one question about the notion of jobs being concentrated in CBD? So would employers revisit the monolithic notion of CBD?
Sure. Before that, I'm just going to add a comment back to Sue, PIYUSH, if that's all right.
Yeah,
I can recall from in my office, our HR were very OH&S conscious 3 or 4 years ago when people started working from home, and it worked very well, but you'd have to send a photograph of your working situation back to them to get approval that the chair was ergonomically right, blah, blah, blah. Now, with all due respect, a kitchen bench is fine. Okay, we've softened, right? We've become a bit more pragmatic. Back to the notion of the monolithic notion of the CBD and its influence in the future and how that might change. Look, I think it is going to change, and for some organisations this is already in the pipeline. They're thinking about it, and obviously COVID-19's brought this on. I'll give you a few examples. Certainly Worley, who you may know is a global engineering group, they've come out and said they're looking to halve its 46,000 global workforce to ensure that they can partially or permanently work from home, and they see that as a way of halving their office footprint globally, and also saving about $70 million in office costs. Now, that's exaggerated, and it's a bit blown out. But some are thinking that way. Zuckerberg at Facebook has recently stated, and he expects half of Facebook's workforce to spread, which is spread across 70 offices, will in the future permanently work from home. Again, I don't think that's right. I don't think they'll be permanently home, but they might be 80% at home. And certainly the tech workers can do that. So it does depend on, different industries will respond differently, but all that flows through. And these guys do occupy space, and a lot of space in the CBDs. Look, hot desking, I think, will be out for the time being, at least, as Ellie has said. And look, whilst more space will be required per worker because of social distancing, for the next few years, this is expected to be more than offset by less aggregate demand for CBD office space due to a decline in the size of the workforce and the emerging preference for some workers to spend more time working from home, or alternative locations closer to home if they're available. So that whole thing, I think it's brought about in a way as people have come to the conclusion that they don't like commuting. They don't like spending as much time commuting if there's an alternative. Right? Now, this will have implications on the type and the location of office space, as well as the design and fit out. And for example, our traditional CBD high-rise office towers, sort of places I work in, is at one end of the spectrum versus regional, decentralised, lower-rise, naturally ventilated offices at the other end. There will be a variety, as there is at the moment, but this will, I think, come more to the fore. And there'll be an impact on the way we design our homes, with there being a little bit more emphasis on having a secure and technologically enabled workplace at home. I have, in my apartment, we have an office come study. It's only 2 metres by 2.5. It's got a door. That's its biggest advantage, right? You can close off. There'll be a little bit more thinking about having appropriate places to do work from home. So that'll change your apartments, change your houses, etc. The CBD office sector, particularly Melbourne and Sydney I'm referring to, will be clearly impacted by not only more people working from home, but also from the expected increased acceptance of decentralised locations. I think that's going to happen. Some in the suburbs, your Parramatta's, your northern beaches, your hub and spoke, there'll be a bit more emphasis on having alternative locations. CBD will still be there, don't get me wrong. There'll also be a little bit more potential for regional cities to accommodate office workers, such as your Geelongs and your Newcastles. So that's all, part of the way the cities will change slightly. But look, you've got to remember that we have enormous investment in our CBDs. And they are, if you take Melbourne, Sydney in particular, and Brisbane, they're some of the best CBDs in the world. We also have some incredibly talented and creative people who will really assist our CBDs respond to these challenges, and CBDs will fight back big time, right? There's such an investment involved. How that's going to play out, we just don't know. But I'm sure, as Ellie said, it will happen.
Thank you, Peter. There is a question coming in. Maybe I'll pose that question to Sue. Will we see a change in office layout? For example, offices focusing on activities that require more face-to-face social interaction with hot desks and Carol-based independent activities shifted off-site?
So what we're certainly seeing from our survey is an incredible desire to work some of the time from home. So very few in the extremities, but certainly a high number of people who do want to do more remote work, but equally a very high number, so 80% who really do miss the office. So we are social beings. We want social connection to our kind of tribe or the purpose of the organisation. And there's certainly, big benefits in physical space to facilitate growth and learning and to drive change. So I think, offices will have a high emphasis on the sorts of spaces that are best, if you like, for collaborative activities. In the short term, I think that's a really difficult thing because you've got the distancing piece in place. But if we think about a longer term, post-vaccine or when we can actually get closer together, I think those spaces will become really important. Perhaps the rows of desks, allocated or unallocated, might start to decline. And I think to whoever asked that question, perhaps we will see more kind of bookable individual spaces for people who do need that kind of high levels of concentration and privacy but cannot work at home because, they either don't have the space or the appropriate, kind of environment generally, people at home, children at home, etc.
Thank you very much. Ellie, a few days back you were mentioning that it was easy to get new buildings built in CBD, particularly when there was a lockdown. There's another question which is not necessarily related to that, but it's to the change behavior, is that will it be harder to get new CBD office towers up for development now?
Well, I guess there's a twofold answer to that question. Certainly in a recession, it's notoriously difficult to get any development off the ground, whether that's commercial or residential. So if we just park that for the moment, because that's going to be reality for the next 6 to 12 months, if we look beyond that, I think that people will want to continue to have office accommodation in the CBD, and that's for a number of reasons. Whilst everybody feels that they're incredibly busy at the moment, I don't think we have proven that we are actually either more collaborative or more productive working from home or as we are now. And certainly you hear a lot of leaders say that it's very hard to be present and to instill the corporate culture that they want remotely. And therefore, I really do think that the need for office, particularly in the CBD, will continue. CBDs are fantastic places, they offer you the social aspects. It's easy to access by public transport. I don't think that people have missed that, and they will continue to do so. And if you think about how trade happens around the world, it's always been around CBDs, even whilst there have been pandemics or epidemics and wars and recessions and so on. So I don't think our office in the CBD is dead. It will, however, take some time to recover whilst we are in a recession.
Right. Thank you very much. Peter,
Can I just add, I agree with everything that Ellie said there. I think we've just hit the pause button, right? And the pause button says hold, right? And give us some time to work this through and to see how the pandemic actually pans out, be it longer term impacts or not. Not much is going to happen in the short term.
Peter, would there be any implications on infrastructure within the city?
Sure will. Look, short term, obviously significantly lower patronage levels, and patronage will be staggered. This is for public transport throughout the day more. That's an obvious one. Yes, there'll be people using bikes, people walking too, obviously, but public transport still will form a very important component of how people commute to their workplace. This will take some pressure off public transport, and you've got to remember too that the last few years it's been under enormous pressure, not coping at all. We haven't got the correct infrastructure. It's lagged, particularly in Melbourne and in Sydney. And look, I think there will be a reluctance by many workers to use public transport for a while, preferring to work from home or commute by car. And they'll to get to work. Unfortunately, one of the outcomes is here, people will use the car more as a way to get to work. And that's going to increase road congestion. I was on the road on Wednesday afternoon, going from the city down to the country and going past through the suburbs where the schools were. It was 3:30, and boy, should you have seen those queues of people picking up school kids, for example, how much congestion that caused. And just the congestion will just build from now. I can't see any way around it, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. So may I come back to you and ask you a question, that the studies which you have conducted, what have people said about their experiences of working from home?
Yeah, so the majority of people have actually enjoyed the working from home experience. So whilst they're absolutely missing social interaction, there's certainly been a high number of people reporting their ability to kind of manage their work life and have sort of taken on a different sort of view around working from home. Others, there's a small number who find it really hard to draw the boundaries between work and life, who have had some increased stress because they're working more hours than, they ever have before. Definitely homeschooling has had, another kind of overlaid sort of stressful situation around that. And, people have certainly recorded higher levels of snacking, so not being able to stay out of the kitchen, and decreased levels of exercise as well. So I think, there's an incredible amount of self-management required, to keep those balanced pieces, in check. But it's been an interesting experiment from that perspective. I think leaders have learned some new skills around, checking in with teams. We've certainly had leadership being more visible across the organisation through, kind of broadcasts. But equally, we're social animals. We need to kind of get together to communicate different ideas and values. So, it really is a situation that requires the balance of the two. So we don't think, we're going to lose the office or the kind of central gathering type of space. People have also reported high levels of productivity. But, one thing that we wanted to caveat was, when you ask someone about their individual productivity, they think about what's on their task list typically. Have I done everything I needed to do today? Have I read all my emails? And, the kind of sum of individual tasks doesn't necessarily add up to kind of an organisational productivity. So I think, to use Peter's expression, organisations have almost been in that pause on that front as well. Smaller groups are kind of trying to work through the strategy through this particular time, and that's definitely been a harder proposition to do online, and that sort of speed of decision making I think has been difficult as well.
Thank you very much. Ellie, what management lessons have been learned and what new management paradigms have emerged out of these last 3 months?
Well, look, it's been incredibly challenging, I think, for leaders to bring their teams together. But certainly the experience with Indexus has been quite positive. What we've noticed in particular is leaders communicating more frequently and via different channels to reach different people. Gone are the days where you can just walk up to someone's desk or just scan a room to see the vibe, so to speak. You don't have that as an option anymore. But certainly engaging in communication and frequently has sort of been a new trend. I do notice that there's a lot of stress that's happening in the organisation, and people probably don't want to be too open about it, but certainly I think it is for leaders particularly stressful to keep a very positive face 24/7. You're constantly on a Zoom or a video. You can't just hide behind your screen and have a moment of stress. You're on all the time, and I think leaders have had to adapt and create space for themselves so that they can actually bring that energy and that extra level of communication to workplaces. I noticed, for example, myself, the first few weeks it was just half-hour Zooms from 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock at night, and you wonder, you haven't even had a cup of coffee or a bite to eat. So it has required people to be much more strict about their timetables and book some free time into your diary during the day so that you can actually recover. And that, coupled with what Sue was saying, is you don't actually get to stand up from your desk and walk in between meetings. So the physical impact on your well-being has also been significant. So I'm not sure I've answered your question in terms of management styles and so on, but certainly people have had to adapt very, very quickly. And I'm just mindful now that this has been going for 3 months at a significant pace. And I think organisations need to probably stop and take a breath and say, okay, we've done well so far, but it's not over. We've got to keep going like this probably until the end of the year. So what do we need to do to adapt to this crazy new normal?
Thank you, Ali. Peter, there's a question which I'll direct towards you. We have major infrastructure projects in progress or deep into planning stage. If what we are going to see is a kind of return to suburbia, should we now be rethinking all of those projects and transportation planning and zoning in general?
Thank you, PIYUSH. Look, I don't think so. I think there's slight changes. We're not going all out in the suburbs and they're just going to boom and so on. The CBD will continue. It's got its ongoing role. I don't think that will change dramatically unless we have wave after wave of pandemic, right? Then it's another issue. But we've got infrastructure lag on a lot of things. So there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built in place. Yes, it does serve the central area. The central area performs a number of different functions rather than just provision of office space. It's education, it's entertainment, it's cultural, administrative. There's a whole lot of things. So I think that infrastructure is still required. Yes, you could argue there's more infrastructure that's required to service some of the key hubs in the suburbs. No problem with that. And there may be a little bit more emphasis on that, but there won't be major changes, I don't think, to our investment program of infrastructure, which is supporting the major cities.
Thank you very much. There's one more question. Sue, maybe I will direct that to you. Will the skills and expertise required in the property industry change post-COVID?
I think what we've seen in terms of the things that have been going on with flexibility and choice for employees and and attention to well-being and sustainability. I mean, these are trends that have been going forward for a while, and I think COVID has really just accelerated the implementation of some of these things. So I don't think, whilst this is kind of a major event, it's not a massive shift in thinking. It's really just about, everyone kind of getting their house in order, I suppose, to, come to the party around all of those things: flexibility, choice, well-being, mental health, physical health. So I'm not sure that there's a whole lot of new skills. It's more about sharpening the ones that, we've always had to have. Ellie, did you want to add to that?
Look, I can probably add from just a practical property perspective. So, property is a very physical thing. You have to touch and feel it. In the past, that's certainly how we've assessed quality of property. So we're seeing an enormous amount of technological evolution in terms of what a virtual inspection looks like. And accompanying that will have to be improved skills of how we interact with customers virtually. So that's not easy to do. It's not as simple as just a handshake and a smile anymore. So I think that in terms of developing interpersonal skills virtually, that will be something that need to evolve into the future. The other big area I think we'll see change is just in that health and well-being and hygiene space. Changes to mechanical ventilation in offices, for example, touchless lifts, things of that nature, I think will need to evolve, and that will probably see other industries infiltrating the property industry to change it.
Right. And Ellie, while you're there, can I also ask you another question? Would that mean that interest in rated buildings like WELL or some other green rated buildings would increase or accelerate?
Look, there's no doubt about it. I think the lay people don't really understand green and WELL. I think the industry understands that very well, but there's probably something that we need to do in terms of communication along those things. But the principles of green and WELL are something that our customer base will definitely look for. They might ask it in much more simple terms, like, what's the air quality in the building? And how can you guarantee that it's safe for me to use an end-of-trip facility? But certainly the elements of those tools will definitely become more relevant and more prevalent in the sorts of questions that our customers will ask when making a decision around property.
Yeah.
So could I just add to that, PIYUSH? I think what happened in the 90s that builds on the earlier point that Ellie made is there was a flight to quality. When you have an excess of space and you have good quality space, those buildings are filled, right? And now we have green, and we have WELL, and we have all these other issues related to sustainability and health and well-being, which are at the fore of people's minds when they make that choice. What this is going to do is it's going to render a lot of your B grade, Ellie, and A grade, I think, as obsolete, and will experience high vacancies and will be under pressure for what happens to them in the future. And then you come back to, what do you do with those buildings? You're either redevelopment sites, or they are converted to other forms of use, or they are refurbished and brought up to scratch to meet the new standards. And that's already happening, we know that, but I think this is going to bring that on a lot faster. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And I think also in that vein is the the building management or the approach to building management. So people will be looking for a landlord that they can trust, actually understands all of these new tools, understands the need for hygiene, etc. So it will change.
Yeah. And Ellie, what do you think would happen to the risk for property investment?
Property investment, as I said before, I think investment in commercial office buildings of late has been, or there's been significant investment from overseas vehicles, particularly superannuation funds. And as I was saying before, they see Australia as being a fairly safe haven. The way Australia has been able to lock down and control the coronavirus has been, world leading. And I know that our newspapers report doom and gloom, but I think, when compared to the rest of the globe, Australia and New Zealand are in very good shape in terms of being able to give investors confidence that it's safe for them to invest here. So I think whilst we haven't seen a lot of deal evidence lately, the last transaction involved Dexus and Rialto. That allegedly was a pre-COVID deal, but it was closed after COVID. That's really the only example of that I can think of a very significant transaction happening in Melbourne. But I know that there are discussions happening. Never waste a good crisis, as our CEO would say. So we will probably see a bit more CapTrans transaction, obviously not at pre-COVID prices, but I think the interest in a good quality commercial assets will continue.
Thank you very much. Peter, one more question which has come for you. What are the challenges that governments, state and local, need to address to bring confidence back to the CBD, but also to promote suburban or regional centres to invest in workplace?
Look, I think it will. Yeah, we've got some pretty good bodies that promote the CBD, for example. Part of it's government, but it's also committees for Melbourne and a number of other bodies who are really out there to promote the city. They will respond. And look, it's not at crisis levels, right? So I think, as I said, it's pause at the moment. This will take a while to sort itself through. If that does become more of an issue of the CBD impacted, efforts will have to increase without any doubt. But there's so many positives going for your CBD in any event. It's just a bit of reaction that's come out of COVID-19 in relation to commuting and more difficult to go to your office. Look, staggered public transport times, staggered office hours, staggered, there's lots of ways to help mitigate some of those influences that we're going to have. So I think overall, they will do that. Yes, it'll also accelerate some of the suburban centres in terms of giving them more of a boost to do that, and they should be actually highlighted as to which ones and where to try and figure that out. Part of that has to do with your public transport, clearly. So where your investment in public transport is to make sure that you're choosing the right locations. But that will occur, and I've got no doubt the state government in particular will be right on top of that.
Thank you very much. Sue, one more question from participants. Will we continue with open plan, or will the office Dilbert Cube be back?
Well, let's hope not. I think unless you're running a tailorist organisation, the workplace isn't actually really about efficiency of work. And I think one of the things that this COVID work from home situation has given us is that people can actually operate from an efficiency basis at home reasonably well. So the ability to do individual productive work has been reported back in spades. It's the together work that suffers. So I think we're going to see workplaces that are much more about that social connection, the growth and learning, serendipity, communicating ideas and values, which is really what organisations of today are really about, kind of getting that innovation, speed to market ideas. So I think, the Dilbert office doesn't communicate that either. And I think, hopefully what we're going to see is better, more richer, experiences in the workplace, and then a lot of choice for employees so that, they can do their best work wherever they are, whether it's physical or virtual or probably a combination of both.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time. The final word from you, what will be the new normal for workplace look like? Ellie, maybe you can answer this one.
Yeah, look, I will apologise in advance, but the workers upstairs have started drilling. So if it starts to sound too noisy, I'll put myself on mute and someone else can take over. But look, the new normal will be whatever you want it to be. I think we've proven that you have a choice. You can work productively in the office, provided you feel comfortable to do so, and you can probably work productively at home. Personalities are different. Everyone will have different feelings about this. But I think if there's one positive that's come out of this pandemic is that you have a real choice now. Employers have recognised that it's okay to work from home, and people are productive and safe working from home. And I think that will lead to a more productive workforce if you're giving people the opportunity to work in the way that of their choosing. Frequently that translates into greater productivity. So look, I don't know. I'm optimistic. It's going to be okay. We'll be fine.
Thank you very much. And Sue, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Ellie's absolutely right. It's really about unlocking the choices for individuals, the ability to customise the way you work in the right way for you and for, what you're trying to achieve as an organisation. I think, technology is only going to continue to improve, and hopefully what we'll see is a consistent experience across the board, whether you're in the office or at home or somewhere else. So I think that's certainly something that will challenge organisations to get that experience consistent and correct.
Peter, your thoughts on new normal for office?
Look, I think much of the same, PIYUSH. There will be certainly more working from home. How much is another issue. It suits some people, it doesn't suit other people. I worry a little bit about it to the extent that people who are of a higher income bracket are in a much better position to work from home. They have the facilities, they have the space, etc. It's easier. They can make that choice. So that will certainly happen. I think the CBDs will continue. Yes, there'll be more decentralisation. Yes, there'll be a number of these things happening, but we will adjust unless there's, as I said before, second wave, third wave, or permanent pandemic, which of course will change everything. But I'm optimistic. I'm confident that this will go forward, and there will be a great amount of change. What the new normal is, we don't know. But we have been shown that we adjust, we're agile, and hopefully some good things come out of this. And yes, we do work more productively, more efficiently. We have to learn from others. We have to have that collaborative aspect, which is the hard point. But overall, we're in not a bad place. And as compared to a lot of other countries, as the others have said, we're in not bad shape.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Peter, Sue, and Ellie, and all the participants for such a lively discussions today. I think we are in a better situation than what we were 3 months ago, and we have a better idea of what the workplace of the future will look like. It has been an incredible afternoon, and I would like to thank each one of you who joined us today. And please stay tuned for our next webinar in July. We'll be sending invitations very soon. Thank you very much.